This guy, come on, let's bring this guy up here. I'm so sorry, this is the process. We don't want to break the law because we only have one officer who showed up, because that's all you need for a crowd like this. All right, what is your name, sir?
Yusef.
Yusef, nice to meet you, Stephen. So I believe, let me explain my position. I believe that socialism is fundamentally evil. And I have this here. We usually don't reference this, but it's sources in case someone wants to look at them afterward, but I don't think, I won't use, it's not fair for me to use them. So I believe socialism is evil. Right. You disagree. I would love to hear you change my mind.
Okay, well, what's your position on the minimum wage?
Well, hold on a second. Is this your changing my mind? I want to make sure.
Yes, I want to get started.
Okay, my position on the minimum wage. Yeah, you know what? I'm not a fan.
So you think there shouldn't be any minimum wage at all?
Yeah,
Should
not
be
a fan.
zero.
Not a fan.
Okay, are you against illegal immigration and legal immigration from poor third world countries at the scale that we've been having it so far?
Am I against illegal immigration? The answer is, what was that? Volume. Well, we're going to do everything we can. Like we said, this is last minute because we're not necessarily friendly here. I'm against, no, I mean, they don't consider us friendly. So like I said, this is, we appreciate you supporting us. Of course I'm against illegal immigration. But again, socialism, I believe the idea of socialism, let's do this before we go on, okay?
Right.
Because this is something, and I think this is important, this is something that we often see from both the right and the left. See, we started with the premise where I made a statement, socialism is evil.
Right.
And you've moved on to different questions, different topics. So I'd like to first, before we move on, if it's okay, let's define socialism.
Okay.
How do you define socialism? So I know that we're agreeing on that premise.
Socialism is a system in which the state redistributes wealth from what it would be under a pure capitalist system.
Okay, I think we agree on that. Okay, and then I think it's important to but don't boo. This is just an actual discussion. I might be wrong here. And what do you think I mean by evil, or what would we both agree the definition of evil is?
Harmful to society.
Not necessarily to society. I believe morally reprehensible. It's immoral. Okay, so as we both agreed, socialism is basically a collective, a governmental control of the distribution or means of distribution or production. And when I say evil, I mean I believe that is immoral. So can we both agree with that?
I don't agree that it's evil.
No, but we agree that that's what I'm saying. That's my position.
Yes.
Okay, so what part of my position do you disagree with? Again, the goal here is to change my mind, not score points.
Well, I'm trying to convince you that your own objectives, if you're a conservative, cannot be achieved under capitalism.
Okay.
And so I'll give you an example of that.
Yeah.
You have a lot of Republicans like Paul Ryan who are obstructing Donald Trump. Well, hold on. You cannot deny that he is a big capitalist, and he has lots of capitalist donors that would like nothing more than to increase their profits. I think you can agree with that. And people like that have been opposing immigration reform for decades because they believe that mass immigration will lower the wages of the working class and increase their profits.
Now, I would say a lot of what you just said is correct.
Okay.
In that many conservatives, Republicans believe that mass immigration from countries like, say, Mexico, from quote-unquote third world countries, could lower the wages. Yeah, I do believe that a lot of Republicans believe that. Okay, so I would agree with you on that.
So if you impose a minimum wage, you're not going to have this mass immigration coming in because the companies that are taking these illegal immigrants and taking these low-wage immigrants, if they had to pay them $15 an hour, we wouldn't have mass immigration like we're having right now.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know that I agree with that premise. So let me kind of go, because first off, before I would like to take that, hold it. What example will we point to before we go on? Because I know a lot of times we disagree, of a successful socialist country.
Well, there are different kinds of socialism. I think you're thinking of the Soviet Union and Venezuela when you say these are unsuccessful countries. But you also have Sweden, you have Norway, you have Finland, you have Denmark, you have Germany.
Sure.
These are countries that have robust economies and high levels of socialization.
Right. What's their minimum wage?
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head.
What if I told you that they have no minimum wage?
There are plenty of countries that have high minimum wage. Australia has a high minimum wage.
I know, but we didn't talk about them. We talked about successful socialist economies. Now, first off, I think it's interesting. This is important because we need to define the premise. First off, we're away from the premise, which is the moral argument. I believe socialism is immoral. The redistribution of something that you have not earned, I believe, is fundamentally immoral. I believe that's theft.
Are you an anarchist?
Hold on a second. Then we'll go in. So now we moved on from that to the pragmatic. And no, I'm not an anarchist. And then you brought up successful examples in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, I believe.
Yeah.
First off, these aren't socialist countries. Now, the reason we would point to countries like, say, Venezuela or Cuba, for the same reason Bernie Sanders did for decades, is because they're true examples of socialism. The Danish Prime Minister said, Bernie, stop referring to us as a socialist economy. We're a free market economy. They don't have a minimum wage as we know it. They only allow collective bargaining between unions, higher skilled unions, and their employers. So these are countries, by the way, if we want to get into their immigration laws, the only way to make it work, if you refer to those countries, I mean, I guess I would have to ask, it sounds almost as though you're making an argument. Are you a nationalist?
I would say I'm an economic nationalist.
You are an economic nationalist?
Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. So you part ways with a lot of probably your more left-leaning brethren.
I never said I was a liberal.
Okay, so you're a conservative socialist. They're hard to come by. So no minimum wage there. But again, this doesn't change the idea. Let's get to the fundamental premise.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the pragmatic, and I'd be happy to. But I believe that socialism, the ism that we both agreed upon,
Yeah.
the collective means, seizing of distribution, production, is immoral.
I mean, the argument is absurd because if you say that it's immoral, then you also have to say that government funding of police is immoral, government funding of the military is immoral. Anything the government does is immoral, and that's ridiculous because you have to have some state that's going to socialize certain things. And so the question is not, do we have socialization? It's how much.
Sure. I would disagree with that. Now, would you know where I disagree with that? Guess what I'm going to say.
I assume you're going to try to argue that government funding of the military and police is not socialism.
Why would I say that?
Well, because if you don't argue that, then you're going to have to give some ground on
Yeah.
socialism.
No, absolutely. I think you're right. If I have to concede that police force, as he's saying, police force, military, roads is socialism, the same as healthcare, education, and I'm assuming that's why you're referring to Denmark and Sweden. They're not socialist economies, but they have more of a social safety net. That's kind of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, they're social democracies.
They're market economies with higher emphasis on a social safety net. That's how they describe
That's
it.
what a social democracy is.
So okay, we agree on the term. Let's go with social democracy. I just want to make sure we don't get confused like democratic socialism as though that changes anything. But we just talked about this, conceding that ground.
Yeah.
I don't believe that the military and the police force would be the same as socialized healthcare school.
Why not?
Sorry, because we only have one microphone. We had to do a late setup. I appreciate you working with me.
Well, I mean,
Why not? Why not was your question.
our definition was that.
So why not?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to make sure you don't. Why not? Because there's a difference between a public good and a commodity. Can you explain to me the difference between public goods and a commodity?
Well, in economics, a public good is a good that is, I believe, non-excludable and non-rivalrous. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that would include things like the police, the military. You'd be hard-pressed to even find hardcore libertarians to say that we don't need those. Okay. So there's a big difference. There's a fundamental difference between that and something like healthcare or school.
It's still
Or it goes to free internet, as Sven Computer talked about in Germany now. High-speed internet is a right. The second you declare any commodity to be a right or to be a fundamental role of government, that means the government can now remove that right depending on who's in power, and that's the problem. That's why I think it's fundamentally immoral for someone to take something they haven't earned, regardless of who's in power. I think it's immoral for Donald Trump's administration to take it from you, just as you probably think it's immoral for Barack Obama's administration to take it from me. So the difference there would be, first, public goods versus commodity. And I think that's an important distinction for everyone here to make, because it's a common argument we hear from the left. If you support any role of government at all, that means that this is socialism. But it's not according to the definition that we agreed upon. Something else, I think it also matters the constitutional parameters of government, right? What the Constitution defines what our government is and what fundamental human rights are.
Well, I want to get back to your earlier point where you said that because the military is a public good, that therefore it's not socialism. In your definition, you never made any distinction between different types of goods. You just said a socialist economy is one that takes wealth from some people and gives it to others, and that's what financing a public good is.
Well, no, it's not. You talked about redistributing, the common means of production or distribution. So if we want to frame that in, I certainly wouldn't say that that's the police. Oh, someone's yelling. Hopefully we're good. So I would not agree with you that the military or police would be socialist. But to move on here, again, let's go to the Danes, Denmark, Norway, Sweden. You pointed to them as successful examples of socialism, because that would be different from your definition of socialism. So now I moved on from the idea that taking something you haven't earned to give to someone else is morally reprehensible, regardless of the reason, because socialism can only be enacted through the threat of violence. That's really what taxes are. At the end of the day, we all agree on that.
Violence is part of life.
Okay, well, I don't believe there should be a part of life for someone with guns to come in if I don't pay for Timmy's health care. I just disagree with that.
If you don't pay taxes, you're going to have other forms of violence that arise spontaneously. This sort of autistic libertarian idea of, oh, you can have a non-aggression.
Stop it. He's been watching Matt Damon videos. Continue.
This idea of a non-aggression principle is just fantasy. Okay, you have to have.
Describe to me. You just said autistic, and this was very civil until you brought that up. Define autistic here.
Well, it tends to be characterized by an an overemphasis on logic and philosophy as opposed to reality. You know, it's very easy to argue from syllogisms and axioms and all that.
So hold on a second, I want to make sure, before you move, because what you do is you speak in these paragraphs. We need to determine what these definitions are. I think we both agree that's fair.
Fine.
Okay. So you just said that autism, if I'm not mistaken, and I would love for you to bring this up, is rooted more in philosophy and theology than facts? Than logic or reason?
Logic, syllogisms, that sort of thing.
That's what you believe is the definition of autism?
Well, because it leads you down these intellectual...
No, do you believe that's the definition of autism?
No,
no, you
I'm
don't.
using it in an informal way.
Okay, so you're using it in an insulting way.
You could say that.
Okay.
A little bit of banter.
A little bit of, yeah. Well, we don't call that friendly banter generally. We
Okay.
call that being a dick. So I want to go back to hopefully keeping it civil. You know, I wouldn't call you retarded. You know, I wouldn't say that you had a
Fair
fight
enough.
with the Clippers and the Clippers won. I wouldn't do this. Let's keep this very civil. So let's go back to Sweden, Denmark, Norway as examples. You pointed to them as successful examples of socialism. It was interesting to me that you said, I know you'd want to point to the USSR or Venezuela or these places, but really we should look to these Scandinavian countries.
Sure.
Why?
Because they provide a good quality of life for their citizens. You don't have this gigantic gap between the working class and the upper class. There is a commitment of the state to the well-being of their citizens, and I think that's a wonderful thing.
Okay. So first off, I agree with you that first off, the overall well-being of citizens is a tremendous thing. I think we would all want. I think everyone here wants a better society, wants a better America. I don't think that you want a worse America. No. I hope that you don't believe I want a worse America, despite the fact that you implied I might be autistic. So maybe I don't know what's best for America. You know, autistic and such. Keep your hate speech off this campus. But your reasoning there, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said there isn't the same kind of gap, the inequality gap. That was your, I want to get, because you speak in, like I said, in longer paragraphs. Sure. It seems the fundamental premise there was Denmark, Norway, Sweden, they're examples because they're successful. They have a higher quality of living, and the main purpose, the main justification used was there's less of an inequality gap. Am I correct? I don't want to misrepresent you.
Yes.
Okay. So your problem is with inequality.
It's one of several problems. I think another problem when
but
you have...
that was your first issue. Let's go point by point. Okay.
Fair enough.
Inequality. What's immoral about inequality?
Because there's this idea that you're going to have this society, and everybody has social obligations. But if you have a situation where people are being crushed, or where people's wages are going down, you lose the social cohesiveness of that society. You lose the commitment that everybody has to advancing that society.
Hold on a second. I want to, because now you're getting into potential results. The hypothetical, almost autistic one could say.
It's real.
But I ask again, what is immoral about inequality?
What's immoral is that it ruins the society. That's what's immoral about it.
How does inequality ruin society? Because it sounds to me, if I'm not mistaken, what you just went down and described was a problem with poverty.
Yeah.
So your problem is with poverty then?
But poverty is a consequence of inequality.
That's not necessarily true. But, and as a matter of fact, I would argue that there are two very different things. Because I would say, and I think we'd probably have to agree, that the free enterprise, westernized capitalist system has pulled more people out of poverty than any system in existence. And if you look at countries, you said don't point to countries like Venezuela or true socialist economies, there's tremendous equality, but everyone is equally poor. So the problem you have is with poverty, it sounds like, and I think we would both have a problem with that we want to solve ways to eliminate as much poverty as possible.
It's not just poverty. Inequality matters too, because if you have inequality of wealth, you're going to have an upper class that controls the political system and secures its own interests instead of the interests of the people.
Okay.
So yes, inequality matters as well.
Okay, so describe to me, and I'd like to go back to examples of this, the upper ruling class determining the political system.
You want examples of that?
I would like some examples of that.
Sure.
Because I believe, so for example, let's say, you mentioned that inequality hurts people. I would argue no, and I think that's because, again, this is more of a leftist view. I know you said you're not really liberal, but I can tell you by your worldview on economics that you do lean more left because you're seeing it as a zero-sum game. Wealthy people can't get wealthy off of the backs of poor people if they make them more poor. That's kind of, if we're going to talk about motives and attributing motives that you've done a couple of times here, if I believe if I want everyone to be wealthy, I would necessarily, if I need a system of government that would want people to be wealthy, would require people to be wealthy. For someone who would want to control a system of government like in socialist economies, who would want to consistently talk or gain the votes of the poor, they could only be elected if people are poor. Bernie Sanders is not going to be elected by a rich country.
We're not trying to make everybody rich. That's not possible. We're trying to create a fair distribution of wealth. But I want to get back to your earlier question about how are the wealthy controlling the political system.
So let's, an example of that. I don't believe that inequality necessarily hurts someone. I don't believe it's a zero-sum game. You know, for example, Tim Cook And I don't like Tim Cook, by the way. I know Apple people, Android, they're going to start yelling. Tim Cook creating a better iPhone, even though the iPhone 10 kind of sucks.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's where we get the passion. That doesn't hurt me. Him making billions of dollars from that doesn't hurt me. Poverty, bread lines, $160 for a dozen eggs. That hurts me. I have a problem with poverty. I don't care if someone else has more than me, so long as I have a system where I'm able to do okay.
Do you understand that it's the upper class and the capitalists that want mass immigration and want illegal immigration because it's in their economic self-interest? If you're a Republican and you're with the capitalists, you're going against your own interests. The capitalists are not conservative. They're not.
Well, hold on a second. We're talking about capitalist, conservative, Republican here. So you're saying that capitalism, we're talking about the ism now, socialism versus capitalism. Yeah. I don't care what Paul Ryan does in his own time. I don't care what his front page news press is doing P90X and what he thinks about immigration. I couldn't care less.
So what
I don't believe in it. I don't believe. It seems that you would agree in securing the borders. It seems that you would agree in stricter immigration laws.
I would, and it's not. You're not going to get it if you shill for the capitalists.
Well,
they're against you.
Define shill.
Well, if you're
I know you like to sound really intelligent by speaking in paragraphs. One thing, you've misused words several times. And if someone were to call you on it and be as rude as you are, you might look what you might refer to as stupid.
Okay.
So saying autistic or shill, define, because it's a very specific definition. You came in and just said shill. And I'm really quickly ready to give the microphone to someone else if you don't stop doing this, because this isn't the goal of this. What's a shill?
Well, I think you're getting upset because you're losing the debate. But
That's fair, that's fair. What's a shill? No. The person losing the debate is the one who refers to the other person as autistic and a shill. That's generally a good sign. So what's a shill?
I don't have the exact definition, but essentially someone who's, I guess, pushing or advancing somebody else's interests, I suppose.
For profit.
Fair enough. But a lot of these conservatives who...
Well, you're not talking to these conservatives, you're talking to me. This isn't a performance, Paul, here. That's why we're doing this out here. This is a conversation. You're talking to me. I just said that I'm against illegal immigration. It's okay. You can look me in the eyes. I'm not mad at you. I just think it's rude. It's okay. Don't worry. I mean, we're okay. I'm used to people being rude to me. I'm sure you're probably aware of this to one degree or another. Let's move back to, again, Norway, Sweden. We didn't really kind of go to that. You've talked about them as successful examples. Now, we refer to them, and I would agree. I would agree that if we're going to take a model and say they've created a social safety net that functions better than many other countries, for example, socialized healthcare and education.
Yeah, what's wrong with that?
Good. Well, so you would support school vouchers?
I think, in general, vouchers, I think, have a problem because they do lead to the incentivization of private schools. But okay. Any way that the government
I just say because that's what Sweden does.
Yes.
So you would support more of a flat tax and increasing taxes on the middle class and the lower class?
I want a progressive tax.
Okay, well, that's not what happens in Denmark.
They should change it.
Okay, so you would want a lower corporate tax rate?
Not necessarily.
Okay, so here's the one thing. We point to, and I appreciate you taking, what was your name again?
Yusef.
Yusef. I appreciate Yusef taking the time. Everyone give a hand to Yusef. Appreciate it very much. We'll grab someone else here. Thank you, Yusef. This is always interesting to me because we talk about this a lot, and I know, and if we look here, just so, I think we've talked about this, we're going to be actually selling for like $5 or $6. I'm not looking for New York. We're going to be selling the Change My Mind pamphlet so that you guys can actually be prepared for some of these arguments.